Can you imagine I'm 17 years of age and I've been given the opportunity to work in foreign exchange. So I started on my first day and I've walked in and there's literally 100 men on one floor and there was only one other woman that I could see sort of in the distance. I was a pretty confident, cocky 17-year-old. So I went in there feeling like, this is going to be easy. I'd arrived at 7 a.m. It was a very noisy environment. There wasn't even reception staff. There was no such thing as a HR department back then. Nothing quite ever could have prepared me for what I was walking into. If anyone's seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, well, that was like the environment that I was walking into. It wasn't uncommon for them to go in their lunchtime to, a place in York Street that had strippers during lunch. It was pretty wild sort of times. How am I going to cope in this new working environment? My father had always said to me, there's 3 types of women in business. It's really important that I knew walking in what type of person that I wanted to represent as myself. I pretty much had to decide that as a 17-year-old going into this exceptionally difficult environment. Not just difficult because it was so sexist and male-dominated. It was difficult because it was very high pressure. And also, a trading floor, a broking house is a very noisy, rowdy, boys club, lads club. So I sort of started on my first day and I wanted to be treated with respect. So for me, the easiest way to do that was to be very respectful back to other people. And as a traineeship, you have to get lunch orders, you have to get, pick up dry cleaning, you're the dog's body in the office. And I knew that I was lucky to be given this opportunity, so I was quite happy to do that. There was a lot of that sort of undercurrent, I hate to use that word bullying, but it was a real sort of undertone of you're a junior, we're a senior, you've got to learn. We all got put through the ropes. We all got given shit when we started. So you're going to have to go through the same. I hate to use the word because a certain housewife used it about me on Housewives, but it is that sort of hazing, that initiation process that you do need to go through. The first day I walked in, I was called Beaver, and obviously I don't have big teeth, and it was to do with a Naked Gun movie, but it was also a bit of a term of endearment. I could have gotten really offended about that. And I think there is a fine line between, they wanted to give me a nickname so I felt a part of the team. It's not being overly sensitive in those environments as well. And I think that gained a lot of respect for me, was that I could take a joke. I suppose if you looked at it now, you'd say, that's just appalling in the workplace. But that was sort of accepted back then. And I think going into that environment, and I really wanted to be an equal with them, you had to sort of accept that sort of ribbing and a bit of joking around. And I think that's what is, sad about today's workplace. It has become a little bit too PC, where you can't have a joke with someone. Someone walks in and they're wearing a beautiful mauve suit. You can't turn to them and go, wow, you look really nice. People take offense now. You're not allowed to give people compliments. You're not allowed to, ask people about their personal lives. And I think there's, the pendulum has really swung a little bit too far with the whole male dominance. It's a lot of young guys that I mentor now feel like they're discriminated against in the workplace, especially a lot of the guys I speak to that are trying to get internships in finance. They're feeling that it's so pro-females now, and so, they've got to keep the numbers right and they've got to keep the numbers balanced. They're not just looking for the right person for the job. They're actually looking to feel how many females in the quota. And, I know this for a fact because I've actually dealt with people that are hiring in the finance world and say, look, that candidate, he is amazing. He's great. He's ticking every box. But there's a girl there that's not quite as good, but we're going to employ her because we need more women in the industry. So there is a really fine line for that, pushing hard on that. Female equality is the wrong word, because going into that environment, I never didn't feel equal. And I think that's really important to go in with that attitude. Like, I think, you're the right person for the job. It's not about putting a female in the job. And especially when, I'm talking when I started, my career well and truly over 30 years ago, there wasn't that emphasis on whether you're a male or a female. It was just the right person for the job. Obviously, there were certain industries that were a lot more male dominated, and, leaving foreign exchange, I went into hospitality, and working for Ritz-Carlton, it was a lot more equal. It was a lot more sort of male-female ratio. But certainly in higher management, it wasn't overly equal. There's a lady called Jen Brown, and she's one of the first female general managers. So Jen Brown was the youngest general manager for Ritz-Carlton Hotels, and she was a female, and now she runs all of IHG for Australia. So, there was very much groundbreaking times back then for women as well. So I do understand there needs to be an equilibrium between, hiring women and having to push through and really make it in these industries. But I think that comes back to being one of those three, types of women. Obviously, the first type of woman is the one that I wanted to be, which was, to act professionally, to give people respect, to build a career out of respect, and to be accepted as the best person for the job. The second type of woman is one that obviously becomes one of the blokes and is squilling beer and is getting drunk. And look, we definitely had those girls in foreign exchange. They became one of the blokes. I never wanted that because you really lose your femininity. You really lose, I felt I would lose myself as a person. And the jokes and the degradation of you, I think when you become one of the blokes, really there's no fine line. I know when you get together with the girls, you say some things you wouldn't say together if you get together with the boys. So I do get that I never wanted to be that type of woman, or that, one that uses their womanly ways to get what they want. Showing the boobs, being overly flirtatious, using that whole sort of sexuality of being a woman to help her progress her career. And that woman that uses her womanly ways to get what she wants. When I ran a very successful real estate agency called Billy Corp, we had a lot of women that worked in the company, and it was industrial real estate in South Sydney, industrial real estate in Sydney was totally male dominated. Like there was only, a few females. When I started, there was only one other female that worked in the entire industrial market. And I ended up employing females, not because I wanted to have this girl band. It was just the way that the company progressed. These women would come out of uni, they would start contacting me and say, I hear your office is a little bit of a haven. And I was like, well, no, I don't predominantly employ women, but if it's the right person for the job. So we did end up having a very young team that I would train. And I would always say to them, and this is where the whole, third type of woman that came about, I think you had to be more conscious to dress professionally, more conscious to be better, to have more information because I think you were judged a lot faster. Being a female in that industry, a lot of guys would turn around and go, oh yeah, you gave Chrissy Marsh the listing for that property because she's got better legs than me. And it's like, no, mate, I don't have better legs than you. Well, I probably do, but I got the job because I'm the best person for the job. I'm the most knowledgeable. I know the area. I know my market research. So don't try and demean me by saying I got the job because I'm a woman and I'm better looking. Now, don't get me wrong. I think being a female in a male-dominated industry was a huge advantage for me because if there's, 90 agents in that South Sydney area and, 89 of them are male, if I go and pitch for a job, of course they're going to remember me. They're going to remember Chrissy Marsh because I am the only female. So I definitely think there were some advantages in being in that. So I never ever viewed it as being, I'm disadvantaged. And I think half of it is your attitude, and you've got to be really, really careful not to fall into that path. I just recently filmed a show called Traitors. It really showed the dynamics of a corporate world very intensely, very quickly. And, Dicko, God love him, Dicko started to sort of form this boy band, and the boy band was to get, boy votes. And it was almost going back to those times when I was in foreign exchange where, the boys are trying to stick together and then the girls are trying to stick together. And it's like, we want women to be left and we want the women to be last in the traders. And it's like, no, guys, I don't think it's about that. And I very much, you'll see when the show show goes to air. But Dicko and I have a few words about that, because I really do believe in life you can't be banding together and women are going to band together and we're going to go against the men and the men are going to go against the women. This comes back to, having respect for everyone you work for. And I think you've got to remember not to fall into any traps, whether you are male or female, to say, like a lot of the young guys that I was mentoring, saying, I'm just being disadvantaged at the moment because I'm a male. And they start thinking like that and then they perpetuate that. I said, no. I said, you've got to go into interviews with the belief they're going to be choosing the best person for the job. And I really do hope employers, continue with that and don't purely employ women for the sake of, getting up their numbers of so many females in the financial industries and getting up, the number of females. And I say this to a lot of women and they're like, well, it's about time we get a bit of an advantage. And I'm like, no, because if I get a job or, one of my nieces gets a job, I want them to know that they're getting a job not because they're a woman, because they're the best person for the job. Because I actually think the pro-pushing women at the moment takes us back a little. And it's really important to just understand your worth within that corporate environment, whatever that job you might be going for. You've got to understand what your worth is. You've got to understand what the competition is around you. Do you have the best resume? Do you have, the best interview techniques? Are you going in prepared into this corporate job? And a lot of people spend a lot of time on their resume, spend a lot of time now doing interview questions. And then I'm like, so what are you wearing? And they're like, I haven't thought about that yet. I'm like, you've been preparing for this interview for the last 3 months. You've been preparing for this, doing your degree for the last 3 years. You're about to go for one of the most important interviews in your life and you haven't thought about what you're wearing. And it comes back to, the episode that I did on about dress for success. So all of these elements are going to help you within these male-dominated industries. The time that I walked in, and yes, I had a boss that told me I wasn't allowed to wear a skirt. I'm not talking, become a nun and go head to toe and, start wearing, suits like blokes. I very much believe in wearing what you want to wear. But then, I walked into an agent's function and one of the agents, turned around. I was wearing a skirt and he said, can you make me a cup of tea? Pretending I was a waitress. So rather than getting really offended and like, oh, how dare you? And, oh, why would you say that to me? I actually belittled him in a really clever way. I went over and, I took great care. How would you like your tea? Would you like sugar with that? Made a big fuss in front of all these people that could not believe he was so ballsy to ask me to make him a cup of tea. I took the cup of tea over to him and I said to him, listen, I've met another 100 assholes like you if that's the best you can give. So sometimes you do need to stand up. Sometimes you do need to put people back in their place and not be this subservient, and I found I did that, a lot on traders, going into traders. I'm a confident woman. Have I been a confident woman since I've been 17? Yes, because I don't see myself as being any different, whether I'm in a man's world, whether I'm not. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but a lot of my careers were in very male-dominated industries. So when I was at Chesterton's and I was a director still in property, I ended up taking over all of the industrial market for all of Sydney. Wow. Did I ever once think, wow, a woman's taking over all of these jobs of men? And I took over literally, like I'd take over one territory being South Sydney, then I'd take over North Sydney, then I'd take over Parramatta. Then before you knew it, I was running industrial for all of Chesterton's. And yes, I had loads of guys that worked underneath me. I never thought, oh, wow, I'm a woman looking after all these younger guys underneath me. I just thought, I was the best person for the job. I was there. I treated them with respect. They treated me with respect. And I think that's the most important thing you've got to think of in your career and when you're moving forward and, people are questioning, are you meant to be there? And, there might be a little bit of a disadvantage at the moment, but you've just got to always prove to people why you should be there, why you should be the most prepared and why you are the best person for the job, regardless of your gender. And I think that you know, this whole boss bitch, yeah, I do love it. I get called that a little bit, especially around boardroom tables and especially around the round table when I was doing traders. But I really enjoy that corporate environment. I enjoy that strength that you get from other people and being around that boardroom. I'm not looking around that boardroom table going, oh, there's 5 women, there's 6 men. I'm not looking at judging people. And look, I think to be in that industry, you do have to have fairly thick skin and you don't have to, take everything really personally. And I think that's something really important for younger generations in roles now, whether you're in a male-dominated industry or not, is not to be so offended by everything. And that's really, really important for career advancement as well. And I'm not talking putting up with shit, but I'm trying to think of some good examples of, a boss comes over and says, look, this work that you've just given me is really, really unacceptable. It's not fabulous. Well, that's a boss coming to you with, criticism about your work. He is your boss. You need to then go back and fix it and rectify it. Whereas people now, I'm generalizing, but I'm just saying, I think you've got to take a lot less offense. There's got to be a lot more doing, a lot more listening, because your superiors, they have been there before you. And that's a lot, with mentors. I want to, in future episodes, go into mentoring a lot more, because a lot of the time your mentor is your boss. And the example that I just gave you where I was looking after South Sydney, then I looked after North Sydney. My boss at the time, I ended up becoming his boss. And, he was fine with that because, a great guy called Steve Skipper, I worked under him and he was head of industrial for Chesterton's. Eventually, I took over as director for industrial for Chesterton's and he worked under me, but I still respected him more than anything. He mentored me. He taught me so much that I think at the time that I had so much respect for him. When I eventually, got that big position, he was really happy for me because I think he'd felt like his time was sort of up. He'd done enough in the areas and I was taking the company in a bit of a new direction. I was, quite aggressive in terms of cold calling, in terms of prospecting. So I think he loved that. I think he loved the fact that, I was very, very keen to do that, but I still had that respect for him. So regardless, people say, oh, you've got to crawl over other people and push other people out of the ways in order to, advance up the corporate ladder. I totally am very, very against that. I think you only do that with respect. You only get promoted. You only, and by not getting offended and by improving your work. Oh, I've got some little friends. The advice that you've really got to give women in order to fit in is it's not so much about fitting in, it's about doing your job. And, don't be afraid to, if everyone's going out for drinks after work, just because you're a woman, you think, oh, I can't, fit in and go out for a drink with them. Often, you be the instigator. There's no difference. You say to them, hey guys, everyone's going out, or, do you want to all go out for a drink tonight? I think it's really making the effort to be able to fit in, regardless of whether you're, a woman or a man. I think with work, you've got to be seen. A lot of people post-COVID, post-working from home, don't really show their true personalities at work, think that they just have to have their head down into their computer and not really sort of talk amongst work. I think that's the whole reason you get back into the office, is to be able to bounce ideas off people. And you've got to make an impression. You've got to fit in, but you don't just fit in by being silent. And I've been mentoring a young boy, I've been mentoring a young man recently, Jack, and he got an internship. He got a 1-day-a-week internship. Then it went to 3 days a week. And he's sort of in limbo at the moment. He's in a bit of limbo, doesn't know whether he's going to stay on, doesn't know whether he's not. And what I think for him is, I said, are you making an impression at work? And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, do you make an effort to go out and have lunch with colleagues? Do you make an effort to, if you're getting a coffee, ask 5 other people around the workplace, oh, do you need a coffee as well? I think really showing your personality at work is very important because that's what's going to set you apart. If they're putting 5 people off at work, the one that's made the biggest effort, the one that's made personal relationships and personal connections. And that's the problem. People forget about the connections. It's not just producing work and having an output. You've actually got to, at work, have a really big input. So the key success, I believe, to fitting in for a woman, for a man, for anyone in the work environment is you have to make personal connections. You have to have time with your boss and say, look, I know that you've done this career for 30 years. I know that, you're really well placed. I'm at a point in my career where, I really want to stay on. Is there any advice you can give me? Is there anything else I can be doing? And that's the biggest thing. Ask your superiors. It doesn't need to be, your boss's boss's boss. It might be someone that's been in the role for 3 years before you. Make a connection with them. I love that your career progression. I'd love to progress down the same path. What did you do? So all of a sudden, you're not just going into work. You're not just a number giving an output of work. You're actually giving an input. You're becoming a part of the fabric of a company. And I think, I looked at, every company that we have founded and every company around the world. Like I look at our China office. To me, our China office was just so important because people would come in and they would just give output in terms of they'd just produce work and they'd be at their computers and there was no interaction, there was no input into the company or the culture. And I think we were so successful in China because we really developed a culture. I really encouraged people to show their personalities, to have connections outside of work, to meet up, go to the gym together. We had this employee, Sandra. She was one of our first employees, and Ryan, and they would pretty much never interact at work. I don't know whether they thought they were not able to. So I actually put and the photocopier used to be the hub where people used to hang out in the day. So I actually put a note in Chinese saying, you are allowed to speak in the office, you are allowed to interact. And I think once people are given that permission, it's really important because that's how ideas are formed. That's how collaboration is formed. People need to make the effort. It's very easy just to go into work and punch away on a computer. It's hard to go over and ask people questions, to ask other people, not even help with their work. Am I on the right track? Am I doing the right thing? And that's how you form great relationships at work. And that's how you produce great work because you're not then waiting till you get to the end of something and then you're critiqued and you take it so personally because you've worked on this document for 3 weeks on your own. However, if you are collaborating more, and I think this is so important for anyone running any company, any employee being a part of a company, is show you care about the company. I think the greatest improvement that we had in the office with, Sandra and Ryan, all of a sudden there was, collaboration on work. All of a sudden, they wanted to interact within the company. Sandra progressed very, very, quickly in terms of promotions throughout the company. Ryan became one of our most pivotal, property managers from being, this junior guy that really didn't talk to anyone. So I think by, having those intercompany, relations and really making an effort, it then went into their outside world and then they really progressed in their career, dealing with clients and other people. So I loved the fact that the workplace became a lot more humanized and also to see their careers really take off once they just stopped staring at a computer and punching into the keyboard. I think that was the greatest, thing for us. And I look at our China office and how the feel is when you walk in there and how people love to work there and how people just have a sense of not, belonging. And that's what I think is the most important in terms of fitting into any corporate environment is, it's only as much as you put out. It's only as much as you give out. And I think, with Sandra, watching her career flourish, incredibly was just proof that, when you do connect with other people, what the advancements that you can have both within your career and within the company. I think it's also really important to form not allies, but relationships within a company. I remember when I was working for Ritz-Carlton, there's obviously very segregated departments. You had your accounting department, you had your, why are you so needy today? You had your food and beverage department, you had your sales department. So it was very sort of segregated, and there wasn't always a huge amount of crossover. I think with me, when I started there, I really wanted to, not make friends with everyone, but really have that forging of, all areas. People used to laugh. I used to get cooked for me fresh bread every day as an employee by the German chef, Stefan. And everyone's like, how do you get that? I'm like, well, I'm nice to him. I know how many kids he's got. I know about his wife. We have a bit of a chat. And everyone's like, well, but he's in a different department. And it's like, well, that doesn't matter. If I had a problem with a corporate client of mine and I needed something done in accounts, I knew Raj from accounts really well. I could go to Raj and all of a sudden I could get something done. So I think by forming, lots of different friends within a company, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in your department, that's great for different types of promotion, because obviously, someone in accounts might be speaking favorably. Oh, yes, Chrissy in sales was, so helpful when I had problems with this corporate client. We really collaborated well together. So, when there was time to get a promotion, I went from associate sales executive. And then, straight away I went to associate director of sales and marketing. Everyone's like, wow, she got promoted so quickly. But I really made an effort to become friends with, lots of different people within the company, and, really made an effort. A lot of the time you don't feel like going for a drink after work, or you don't feel like, catching up with someone different for lunch. But I'd really make an effort. We actually had a combined lunchroom, and often I would deliberately go down at different times where I wasn't with some of my sales colleagues, so I could actually get to know some people from other departments. And I think that is really important, in any company, is not to just say, oh, I'm in the accounts team, I'm only going to hang with the accounts. And a lot of the time with hot desking now, you can go and sit with other departments. You can go and I think that's really great for career advancement as well, because it's not until you start discussing what someone's role is until you really understand it. And, sometimes that pollination is going to help you within your career as well. So I think with work, don't be short-sighted. Don't just, if it's all female, don't just stick in the all-female, all the boys band have got the boys band. Be confident enough to say, oh, guys, can I meet you, join you for lunch today? And I think that's, view yourself as an equal and really put yourself out there. I know, working in China was a really big eye-opening experience for me, because it's not about, women and men, and there's so many women in senior management over there. No one really has those boundaries, and no one really thinks of it as, oh, I haven't been promoted because I'm a woman. And it's interesting when a person doesn't have those sort of blocks in their heads. I know Sandra in our company, and I keep going back to her because she's just such a great example of an amazing employee that really just wanted more the whole time. And I think wanting more is such a great thing to have. And I'm not just talking about I'm wanting more as in pay increase and more money, because I think if you want more, in terms of your career, people are going to acknowledge that, wanting more responsibility. She ended up becoming one of our top negotiators in all our corporate transactions. And that's just because she constantly pushed for more. She wanted more in her career, and obviously ended up getting compensated financially. Breaking into the boys' club, looking back on it as a 17-year-old, I never thought of it so much even then, although it was scary. And the more successful I became, the more heat and shit that they would give me. And I think by standing my ground and, not giving it to them back, but, being respectful with it as well, calling them out on it. I think that's the biggest thing is, and you've got to call people out, or the boys club at the time. And it sort of makes other people turn around and go, oh, wow, yeah, that was really out of order. So a time when Angus Cook, and I actually ran into him about a month ago and said to him, do you realize 30 years ago when I did a really big deal for Chester International, the day that I went to pick up the check, you said to me, are you wearing a skirt? Are you wearing pants? I thought you were going to sign that big deal today. And I said, yeah, it's so much easier to give a head job in pants. Like, it was such ridiculous. He was so shocked, like so shocked that I had called him out. But I actually called him out on the day 30 years earlier. He couldn't remember ever saying it to me. So I'm sure he just said it in jest. But I think when you can't leave the moment. So if you want to be in this boys club, you want to join the boys club, you've got to make the effort. You've got to make the effort to, go out socially as well, not just, in the corporate world, become a collaborator in at work, respect yourself, realize your own self-worth. And if there are times that someone's made you feel uncomfortable, you do really have to call them out. It doesn't necessarily have to be in public in front of everyone. It could just be quietly afterwards and say, you know what, that really embarrassed me when you said that, just because I'm a woman in this industry, you don't need to make me feel like that. I do believe you've got to call people out as it happens. And I think you've got to have the right attitude and don't have this chip that I'm a woman in a male-dominated world. You are whatever you want to be and see yourself as just another person within a company, but be the best person and be the best at your job. And that's what's going to give you the advancements, not whether you're a woman or whether you're a man. I think there's ways in the boys club that you can sort of go back with a bit of a joke, but it still has a really good message. You're not going to come across as a Karen, like that message that was pretty cheeky saying back to Angus, oh, it's much easier to give a head job in pants, meaning, don't be such an idiot. So there's ways in which to go back with people, back to someone. And if you don't think of it on the spot and you're not quick enough to go back because you're so shocked at the stupid comment they've made, I think it's really worthwhile pulling them aside afterwards so you don't feel like, the whinging Karen. Just say, oh, look, I know it's no big deal to you and I know you probably didn't even mean anything, but, that really hurt, or, really expressing how you feel and just being honest and, don't pull it aside and go to superiors and say, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what this person said about me. Deal with it as employee to employee. And if, obviously if it doesn't go away and the person's causing you huge amounts of grief, well, then maybe you do have to go to someone that's, above them or more senior than them. But I always think with anything, you go to the source first.
Coming up in the industry, when you were less successful, women supported you more. And as you got more successful, women kind of turned on you more and the men supported you more.
I think the more successful in the industry you became, the tougher the men became around you. It was fine when I started in foreign exchange because I just started. And then when I really started to gain traction and, I had a great client, Peter Schutzinger, and he would be, trading with me a lot and I started to become very successful. That's when the bullying and the heat from sort of that male dominance became more. And it's a really interesting thing because I think that the more successful as a woman that you became, the more threatened that male environment became. And I found that was exactly the same when I was in industrial property as well. The more successful I became and the more deals, they didn't feel like that they could compete with me on a level playing field, which I don't believe that's the case anymore. I don't believe that people see you as being female as a threat and that they, but that's how people used to view it. They used to think that, oh, you're getting that job because you're a woman. And I think with that, you've just got to always remain professional, always, understand, regardless of whether you're a male or a female, the more successful that you become, people get jealous. There is a tall poppy syndrome in Australia. When you do become successful, there are other people out there, but I think your success is just proof of that you're doing well. And no matter what they can say, they can never take that away from you. So you've just got to keep your eye on the prize. And that's why I find it really helpful to have goals, is because when there is a lot of noise around you and, people might be trying, there is a lot of jealousy. And I don't care what industry you are. And that's not just being a woman. I think, I've seen it, with my nephews. I've seen it with guys around me. You know, I've seen it with my husband. The more successful that you become, the more jealous people are around you. And I think that's unfortunately just a part of human nature. It's not got to do with being female, and you can't take it personally on the chin. People just get jealous.